I've got a trivia question for y'all to start off with this morning, so please get ready to type your answers in the chat if you're joining us virtually, or to shout them out if you're here in the sanctuary. The question is, what was the first movie ever shown in the White House? I hear it from several portions of the audience here. The Birth of a Nation. It was shown in 1915 when Woodrow Wilson was president, and it's vile, bigoted scaremongering in the form of a film that makes a horribly racist representation of the Reconstruction-era South. Some historians estimate that it was so popular and shown so often throughout the South in the years after it came out that at one point as much as 75 to 80% of the population in our region had seen this film. Ava DuVernay describes in her wonderful documentary, 13th, how long-lasting the impact this film has been on the racial imagination of America. It is an unfortunate example of how popular culture, like movies and TV, can be hugely influential on the world around us, and how, therefore, these things have power. I am greatly indebted to Gloria Jean Watkins, more popularly known by her authorial pseudonym, Bell Hooks, for the concept of cultural criticism. She passed into the ancestral realm in 2021, and her departure was a massive loss for the movement for collective liberation. In Hooks's interview entitled Cultural Criticism and Transformation, she states, quote, "My own sense is that the most enabling thing I can offer as a critic or an intellectual professor is the capacity to think critically about our lives. I think thinking critically is at the heart of anybody transforming their life. I really believe that a person who thinks critically can find ways to transform their lives that can be deeply and profoundly meaningful." Hooks lifts up critical thinking as a form of power available to all, regardless of status or wealth. Can I get an amen? Critical thinking is a tool for change that we can wield no matter how in the bag for our mayor the city council is in the cities that we live in today, how beholden to the multinational corporate influences our elected officials might be. And in order to wield that tool, Hooks proposes that we become quote-unquote enlightened witnesses, saying, being enlightened witnesses when we watch representations means we are able to be critically vigilant about both what is being told to us and how we respond to what is being told. That is how we can both resist certain types of conservatizing representation and at the same time create new and exciting representations. Raising consciousness and critical awareness is fundamental to the project of imagining and creating a better world. It's what allows us to see things in their broader systemic context. The best example of this comes from Hooks's analysis of rap music, about which she says, rap music is so diverse in its themes, its style, its content. But the rap that gets in national news is the rap music that perpetuates misogyny, that is most obscene in its lyrics. It's the perfect paradigm of colonialism, We think of rap music as a little third world country from which young white consumers take whatever they want. An honest accounting would have to acknowledge that young white consumers, primarily male, oftentimes suburban, got most energized in rap music by misogyny, obscenity, pugilistic eroticism, and therefore that form of rap began to make the largest sums of money. The young men who create a lot of rap music are not naive, and they know they can make $1 million talking about obscene misogynistic desires. When I was growing up in the 90s, I associated the music of Tupac Shakur with violence and danger. He was the victim of shooting attacks even before his killing by shooting in 1996. It wasn't until I listened to his music as an adult that I picked up on themes like Tupac's support of the Black Panther Party, which his parents and godparents had been members of. In his posthumously released single, Changes, Tupac sings, "I got love for my brother, but we can never go nowhere unless we share with each other. We gotta start making changes, learn to see me as a brother instead of two distant strangers, and that's how it's supposed to be." I learned that the themes of the war on drugs, treatment of black people by police, racial reconciliation, and poverty were all indispensable to Tupac's canon. It took me years to see him in a more positive light, to accept him as a liberatory figure instead of an oppressive one. The portrayals of him that had filtered down to me originally as a white child growing up in America had asked me to see him in this more violent and oppressive light and not a liberatory one. Bell Hooks' framework of cultural criticism and interrogation has helped me to accept Tupac more on his own terms and less in terms of how he had to appeal to a young, white, male, suburban audience and how he was portrayed in a sensationalist media. Now, at this point, you might be asking, what's the point of all of that? Can't I just like Tupac or not and leave it at that? So, let me offer an example of a TV show that's had real-world consequences in the form of influencing a literal Supreme Court justice. In 2007, former Supreme Court Justice Antonin Scalia, hold your applause, Antonin Scalia told a public panel on jurisprudence that torture was justifiable because of the actions of fictional secret agent Jack Bauer on the TV show 24. Scalia said, quote, "Jack Bauer saved Los Angeles. He saved hundreds of thousands of lives. Are you going to convict Jack Bauer?" One of Jack Bauer's catchphrases on the show is, "You're going to tell me what I want to know. It's just a matter of how much you want it to hurt." I promise, I'm not trying to ruin the show 24 for anyone. It's bad enough on its own. But it's also a reminder that the stories we tell have power, directly and indirectly. That's why the Department of Defense provides substantial access and resources to films like Captain Marvel, Top Gun, Black Hawk Down, and the Transformers series. And they give access and resources in exchange for portraying the military in a positive light in those films. James Gunn, the director of Guardians of the Galaxy, acknowledged, When a film uses military assets for free, those scripts have to get military approval to make sure that the military isn't disparaged in them. This is not a recent phenomenon, but rather goes all the way back to the first Academy Award for Best Picture being given to the movie Wings in 1929, which used military equipment and filming locations. Now, did all of this stop me from going to see Top Gun: Maverick in the theaters last summer? Twice. Absolutely not. I'm not letting the propagandists for imperialist capitalism get between me and watching Tom Cruise race a fighter jet on his motorcycle while the soundtrack plays Danger Zone. I'm not asking anyone to boycott certain movies and watch others, to watch the right thing instead of the wrong thing. That's part of the fun of being in a non-dogmatic covenantal religion that tells us not what to believe, but how to be together. Wild and holy exploration of spirituality doesn't mean sticking our heads in the sand and ignoring the outside world or protesting Christian nationalist films because we disagree with their conservative or theological messages. It's way more fun to watch those conservative Christian films and mock how clumsily they're made. An encouragement to growth, a wild and holy spirituality should lead us into a deeper and more open conversation with one another about the world we want to create and embody. I was so excited to see Avatar 2, The Way of Water, last winter because the first Avatar embodied the themes of colonial resistance, naturalistic harmony, and multicultural collaboration as elegantly as any movie in my lifetime. The second Avatar expanded on these themes, bringing them from the forest to the ocean. And what I like about these films is they're a great starting point for a discussion about themes that can seem very abstract and difficult to find common reference points for. Building collective imagination of the world we want to live in is a vitally important project during a time of transition and despair, such as we are now living in. Our most important duty is to imagine new futures and to collaborate with one another on bringing those into existence. For myself and my generation growing up, the most common and detailed imaginary world that we had as a common reference point was that of Harry Potter. Its stories taught us that even an orphan living under the stairs could defeat fascist authoritarianism if he was imbued with the power of love and friendship. They taught us about mentorship, collaboration, organization, trust, and above all, courage. I've preached before here a sermon called The Liberatory Message of Harry Potter. It was about the lessons in those children's novels related to social justice organizing. Folks came in robes and were wearing wands and waving them about, calling out their favorite Hogwarts houses. And at the end of the service, we all were chanting together about overcoming the fascist forces of Lord Voldemort. It was about as jazzed as I've ever been in a worship service. Some of you know why this is more than a little heartbreaking to describe at this point in time. It's become more and more clear over the last 5 years that Joanne Rowling, the author of the Harry Potter novels, is deeply transphobic. She's what many describe as a trans-exclusionary radical feminist, or TERF for short. She's repeatedly made bigoted and insensitive statements about trans women and stood by them even as her co-workers and fans have discussed with her how harmful those statements have been. So many of us first learned the courage to be our true selves from the Harry Potter novels, that to learn Joanne herself didn't support those ideas in her personal life felt like a severe betrayal. To learn that she had betrayed us like this involved a lot of coming to terms and understanding that the charitable interpretation of her words is that Joanne is deeply uncomfortable with her own gender identity and with the notion of transness. The less charitable interpretation is that she not only struggles with these things, but has played it out on a very public level, both in what she has written and what she has said in the aftermath. In retrospect, transphobia is a very common theme in both the Harry Potter novels and her mystery novels written under the pen name Robert Galbraith. The news of her transphobia was devastating to many of us Harry Potter fans, but it was also an impetus to learning how to read critically, to analyze a piece of art beyond just whether we liked it or not, or whether the good guys won or lost in the end. It prompted me to ask whether the message of Harry Potter was really a liberatory one, if, for example, the government at the end of the novels went back to being the same as it had been at the beginning. To ask why wasn't Hermione the protagonist of these novels all along? To ask why non-human magical beings being stand-ins for various non-white races was an acceptable trope, not just in these novels, but in the Western narrative tradition of literature at large. If you're interested in these sorts of questions, there has never been a better time to seek out literature and podcasts where these questions are explored by queer and trans activists and literary scholars. Y'all, the eighth principle that we are contemplating and that some courageous congregations have passed tasks us to build diverse, multicultural, beloved community. And this is not a trivial task. It takes time and the courage to be vulnerable and open with one another. As Bell Hooks said, popular culture is where the pedagogy is. It's the common reference point for learning from one another and bringing our message of love's wild and holy and transformative power out into the world. If pop culture isn't your thing, bring us the full passion and enthusiasm of whatever is one of your obsessions, and let us use that as a point of connection for our collective imagining of a more just and equitable future. And if there is some aspect of popular culture that's your main obsession, then let's use that as our point of imagining and growing our beneficent and beautiful future. In the words of poet Andrea Gibson, this is a time to pull all your strings, play every chord, never go a second hushing the percussion of your heart. May it be so, and may we be the ones to make it so.